Cold cash doesn't buy oxygen when your throat suddenly closes up. Harrison Cole, worth over $800 million, was suffocating in front of a room full of VIPs. He mocked the terrified doctors, croaking out $1 million bounty. Then, a 22-year-old waitress calmly stepped forward. Harrison Cole despised pity. At 52, the CEO of Cole Dynamics had engineered buyouts that decimated rival tech firms, built an empire from a dingy garage in South Boston, and amassed a personal fortune that allowed him to purchase a sprawling estate overlooking Lake Michigan. He was a man who controlled everything: the market, his board of directors, and his legacy. The only thing he could not control was his own autonomic nervous system. 2 years ago, following a seemingly minor rear-end collision on Interstate 90, Harrison began experiencing episodes. They started as simple hiccups, but rapidly evolved into terrifying, agonizing diaphragmatic flutters coupled with severe laryngospasms. Without warning, his vocal cords would slam shut, locking oxygen out of his lungs while his chest violently convulsed. Johns Hopkins Hospital ran every neurological scan known to modern science. The Mayo Clinic assigned a team of 7 specialists to his case. They pumped him full of muscle relaxants, anti-anxiety medications, and experimental nerve blockers. Nothing worked. The attacks were unpredictable, excruciating, and profoundly humiliating. Tonight, the stakes were astronomical. Harrison had booked the private mahogany dining room at L'Etoile, Chicago's most impenetrable, exclusive restaurant. Across the table sat Gregory Wyatt, the notoriously fickle chairman of a London-based investment firm. Cole Dynamics was attempting a high-wire merger, and Harrison needed to project absolute invincibility. Yet, beneath the bespoke Italian wool of his suit jacket, his chest was already feeling tight. The familiar, dreadful, prickling sensation was creeping up the back of his neck. Hovering just outside the heavy oak doors of the private room was Celine Bennett. At 22, Celine carried the exhaustion of someone twice her age. She wore the immaculate black and white uniform of L'Etoile, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, mandatory bun. She wasn't supposed to be working the VIP room tonight, but the scheduled senior server had called out sick. Celine needed the extra gratuity desperately. Back in her cramped apartment in Rogers Park, a stack of final notices sat on her kitchen counter, right next to the aggressive medical bills for her younger brother, Leo. Leo suffered from a rare congenital airway defect. Since he was an infant, he had been prone to sudden, life-threatening laryngospasms. Celine's mother had abandoned them when the medical debts first piled up, leaving Celine to abandon her nursing degree at Loyola University to work double shifts. She had spent countless nights holding her brother as he turned blue, learning the exact, terrifying mechanics of how a human throat can become a locked vault. Inside the dining room, Harrison swirled a glass of an obscenely expensive Bordeaux. He was laughing, though the sound was noticeably strained. "Gregory, the market is completely misinterpreting the supply chain issues," Harrison said, his voice dropping half an octave, a slight rasp catching the edges of his words. Dr. Leonard Hastings, Harrison's private concierge physician, sat quietly at the end of the table. Harrison paid Dr. Hastings $300,000 a year to shadow him, a human security blanket equipped with a medical bag full of emergency sedatives. Harrison hated him. He hated the constant reminder of his own frailty. Celine stepped into the room to clear the appetizer plates. She moved like a ghost, completely silent, her eyes strictly trained on the china. But as she reached for Harrison's plate, she noticed the slight, erratic tremor in his left hand. She saw the way the veins in his neck were distended, pulsing rapidly. The skin around his mouth was taking on an incredibly subtle, horrifyingly familiar shade of grey. "Is everything to your liking, Mr. Cole?" she asked softly, keeping her tone perfectly neutral. Harrison didn't look at her. He couldn't. He was staring fixedly at the crystal chandelier above the table. A sharp, involuntary hiccup escaped his lips. It sounded like a dog's bark. Gregory Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "Harrison, are you quite all right?" "Perfectly," Harrison lied, though the word squeezed out of him as a high-pitched wheeze. His hand flew to his throat. He tried to take a breath, but his chest simply hit a wall. His vocal cords had snapped shut. The spasm had begun. Celine froze, a silver serving tray clutched in her hands. She recognized the posture instantly. It was the exact same rigid, panicked arching of the spine that Leo exhibited right before his oxygen levels plummeted. "Dr. Hastings!" Harrison's head of security, a massive former Marine named David, barked from the corner of the room. The physician jumped up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He fumbled with his leather medical bag, his hands shaking. It's an attack! Stand back! Give him air!" Hastings stammered, pulling out a syringe of a heavy, fast-acting muscle relaxant. But to administer it safely, Harrison needed to be still. And Harrison was anything but still. The billionaire stood up, knocking his heavy chair backward. It hit the floor with a deafening crash. He clutched his collar, ripping the silk tie from his neck. His face was contorting, turning a deep, terrifying plum color. He was drowning in the middle of a five-star restaurant. Panic erupted in the private dining room. Gregory Wyatt backed away, horrified, pressing himself against the silk-lined wallpaper. David, the security guard, lunged forward to catch his boss as Harrison's knees finally buckled. The billionaire collapsed onto the thick Persian rug, his chest violently heaving up and down, but no air was entering his lungs. The stridor, a horrific, high-pitched squeak of air trying to force its way through a closed airway, echoed terribly in the confined space. Dr. Hastings dropped to his knees, his hands trembling so badly he dropped the vial of medication. It shattered on the floor, clear liquid pooling onto the antique wool. "I need another one. David, hold him down. If I inject him while he's thrashing, I'll hit a vein and stop his heart entirely." Harrison was looking up at the painted ceiling, his eyes wide with raw, primal terror. But even in the face of death, his ego fought a bitter war with his biology. For 2 years, the greatest medical minds in the world had taken his millions and given him nothing but shoulder shrugs and prescriptions. As the oxygen deprivation kicked in, inducing a state of hypoxic delirium, a twisted, macabre humor took over. Harrison managed to force a microscopic sliver of air through his locked vocal cords. He looked at Dr. Hastings, who was frantically tearing open a second box of vials, completely useless in the face of the acute crisis. "Useless," Harrison wheezed out, his voice sounding like dry leaves being crushed. He reached into his suit jacket with a violently trembling hand and pulled out his heavy leather checkbook. He threw it onto the floor. It landed right next to the shattered glass. "$1 million," he croaked, a ghastly silent laugh convulsing his face. $1 million. Heal me, I dare you." He laughed again, a horrific, choking sound that ended in a sickening gurgle. He was mocking them. He was dying, and he was using his last moments to mock the entire medical establishment that had failed him. His eyes began to roll back into his head. "Sir, please!" David shouted, trying to pin Harrison's flailing arms. "Doc, do something!" Celine Bennett hadn't moved. She stood near the mahogany credenza, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The chaotic scene playing out on the floor was a nightmare she had lived 100 times in her own living room. Dr. Hastings was preparing to inject Harrison with a massive dose of a central nervous system depressant. If he gave that shot to a man whose oxygen levels were already crashing, it wouldn't just stop the spasm. it would likely suppress his respiratory drive entirely. He would stop breathing for good. She didn't think about her job. She didn't think about the rent or the strict rules of L'Étoile that forbade staff from ever touching the clientele. She dropped her silver tray. It clattered loudly, but the sound was drowned out by the shouting. Celine crossed the room in 3 rapid strides. She shoved past the billionaire's security guard with surprising force. "Hey, back away, kid!" David yelled, reaching out to grab her apron. "He's going to kill him!" Celine screamed, slapping the security guard's hand away and pointing at Dr. Hastings. "If you sedate him now, his airway will collapse completely. It's a severe laryngospasm. He doesn't need drugs. He needs Larson's maneuver." Dr. Hastings froze, the needle hovering inches from Harrison's shoulder. "Who the hell are you? Get this waitress out of here." Harrison's lips were now completely blue. His thrashing was slowing down, giving way to the terrifying stillness of unconsciousness. Celine didn't wait for permission. She threw herself onto the rug, positioning herself directly behind Harrison's head. "Hold his shoulders down. Now!" she commanded, with a voice that brooked absolutely no argument. It was the voice of a hardened trauma nurse, not a server. David, instinctively responding to the sheer authority in her tone, pinned Harrison's shoulders to the floor. Celine placed her hands on either side of Harrison's face. She felt the cold, clammy sweat on his skin. She found the exact anatomical landmark she needed, the laryngospasm notch. It was a tiny, specific groove situated just behind the earlobes, right between the mastoid process of the skull and the condyle of the jawbone. "This is going to hurt," Celine said, even though Harrison was barely conscious. With her thumbs, Celine pressed into those notches with brutal, calculated force, simultaneously pushing the jawbone sharply forward and upward. It was an incredibly painful pressure point technique designed to cause an intense stimulus to the glossopharyngeal nerve, overriding the vagus nerve's command that was keeping the vocal cords locked. It effectively shocked the brain into resetting the airway. For 3 excruciating seconds, absolutely nothing happened. The room was deadly quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Dr. Hastings stared, his mouth hanging open. Gregory Wyatt peeked out from behind a leather armchair. Celine intensified the pressure, her knuckles turning white, her own jaw clenched tight. "Breathe," she prayed silently. "Breathe, you stubborn old man." Suddenly, Harrison's body jolted violently. A massive, ragged, tearing sound ripped from his throat, a magnificent, ugly gasp of air. "Oh!" His chest expanded beautifully. He coughed, a wet, violent hack, and then he sucked in another massive gulp of oxygen, and another. The blue tint receded from his lips almost instantly, replaced by a flush of angry red. Celine immediately released her grip and sat back on her heels, her chest heaving as if she had been the one suffocating. Harrison lay on the rug, staring up at the painted ceiling, taking long, greedy breaths. His eyes slowly drifted over to the young woman in the black and white uniform kneeling beside him. He looked at her, then at Dr. Hastings, who was still kneeling uselessly with the syringe. Finally, Harrison slowly pushed himself up onto his elbows. He looked at his leather checkbook lying on the floor. The room held its breath. The millionaire, who had laughed at the impossible just seconds before, was completely silent. He looked back at Celine. "Who?" Harrison rasped, his voice raw and bleeding. "Who are you?" Sunlight pierced the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Cole Dynamics executive suite, but the atmosphere inside the room was freezing. 24 hours had passed since the incident at L'Étoile. Mr. Cole sat at the head of the massive glass conference table, staring silently at a tablet. On the screen, a soundless, high-definition security video, played on an endless loop. It showed the most powerful man in Chicago, collapsing, turning purple, and being wrestled to the floor, only to be saved by a girl making $15 an hour. Cole paused the video exactly at the moment the young waitress dug her thumbs into his jawline. He touched his own neck. A faint, purplish bruise was blooming just beneath his earlobe, a painful, physical reminder that he was no longer an invincible god of industry. He was fragile, and he hated it. The optics are frankly disastrous, Arthur Pendleton, Cole's lead corporate attorney, said smoothly. Arthur was a shark in a three-piece suit, a man who viewed human life strictly through the lens of liability and non-disclosure agreements. He paced the length of the boardroom, his leather shoes silent on the plush carpet. Gregory Wyatt boarded a private jet back to London at 3 in the morning. He isn't answering our calls. The merger is currently frozen. Investors hate instability, sir, and nearly dying in the middle of a salmon course is the definition of instability. Dr. Leonard Hastings sat on the opposite side of the table, dabbing his glistening forehead with a silk handkerchief. He looked exhausted and deeply terrified. "Sir, I must reiterate," Hastings stammered, his voice lacking its usual arrogant polish. "What that server did was incredibly reckless. The Larsens maneuver is an archaic, aggressive physical intervention. If she had applied pressure a fraction of an inch lower, she could have compressed your carotid artery and triggered a massive stroke. It was pure luck. My protocol, the chemical sedation, was the only medically sound choice." Cole slowly raised his eyes from the tablet. He pinned the sweating physician with a cold, unblinking glare. "Your protocol, Leonard, involved watching me suffocate while you fumbled with a glass vial like a frightened intern. She didn't use luck. She used authority, something you completely lacked. Sir, the medical establishment—" "Save it," Cole snapped, his voice still raspy and raw from the trauma. He turned his attention back to his lawyer. "Arthur, what is our exposure here?" "Minimal, provided we act aggressively," Arthur replied, sliding a sleek black folder across the glass table. "The girl's name is Celine Bennett, 22. She dropped out of nursing school 2 years ago due to financial hardship. She has no leverage, no resources, and no standing. I have already drafted a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. It is ironclad. It binds her from ever discussing your medical event, your business, or her intervention. In exchange, we offer a generous gratuity." Cole opened the folder. Inside was a cashier's check made out to Celine Bennett. $25,000, Cole read aloud, his tone entirely unreadable. "I recall screaming something about $1 million right before my brain lost oxygen." Arthur offered a practiced, patronizing smile. "A figure of speech, sir, uttered under extreme duress and hypoxic delirium. No court in the United States would enforce an oral contract made by a man actively suffocating. 25 grand is more money than a waitress like her sees in a year. It's a fortune to her. She'll sign." "And if she doesn't?" Cole asked. "I've already spoken with the general manager of L'Etoile," Arthur said smoothly. "Miss Bennett violated severe corporate protocols by laying hands on a VIP guest. She was terminated this morning, effective immediately. She needs the money. She will sign." Across town, in the cramped, windowless office of L'Etoile's management, Celine stared at the identical black folder sitting on a cheap laminate desk. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a profound, boiling rage. Mr. Davis, the restaurant manager, wouldn't even look her in the eye. He focused intensely on a spot on the wall just above her head. "Celine, you know the rules. Absolute discretion. Absolute distance. We serve the elite. We do not engage with them physically. You caused a massive scene. We comped a $10,000 dinner because of the disruption." "He was dying, Mr. Davis," Celine said, her voice eerily calm despite the rapid beating of her heart. "His doctor was about to inject him with a central nervous system depressant while his airway was locked. He would have flatlined before the paramedics even cleared the lobby." "That is not our determination to make," Davis replied sharply. He tapped the black folder. "Mr. Cole's legal team sent this over. It's a severance package, $25,000. All you have to do is sign the attached document swearing you will never speak of this to anyone. Not the press, not your family. No one." Celine looked down at the check. $25,000. For a fleeting, desperate second, she calculated what that money could do. It could pay off the immediate threats. The landlord, the electric company, the collection agencies harassing them over Leo's past hospital stays. But it wasn't enough to fix the real problem. Leo needed a highly specialized, cutting-edge tracheal reconstruction surgery at Chicago Memorial Hospital. The procedure wasn't covered by their catastrophic, bare-bones insurance plan. The hospital required a deposit of $150,000 just to book the operating room. $25,000 would buy them a few months of breathing room, but it wouldn't save her brother's life. And then there was the promise. $1 million. She had heard the billionaire say it. He had looked right at the useless doctor and dared someone to save him. "No," Celine said quietly. Mr. Davis blinked. "Excuse me." "I won't sign it," Celine said, pushing the folder back across the desk. "He made a public promise. He owes me $1 million, and I need that money for my brother." Davis let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "Are you insane? He's a billionaire, Celine. His lawyers will bury you in litigation until you're homeless. Take the check." "Keep it," Celine said, standing up and untying her black apron. She tossed it onto the desk. "I'm going to collect what I'm owed." 72 hours later, the financial world erupted into utter chaos. It started with an anonymous post on a highly trafficked Wall Street watchdog blog. Attached to the post was a shaky, low-quality cell phone video, shot from behind a decorative pillar at L'Etoile. Gregory Wyatt's assistant had filmed the entire incident. The video clearly showed Cole collapsing, turning blue, and the subsequent chaotic intervention by the waitress. The headline was devastating. Cole Dynamics CEO terminally ill. Hidden health crisis threatens global merger. By noon, Cole Dynamics stock had plummeted 18%. Billions of dollars in market capitalization evaporated in a matter of hours. The board of directors called an emergency session, demanding Cole's immediate resignation. Wyatt officially pulled out of the merger, citing undisclosed and critical liabilities. Cole was trapped in his office, pacing like a caged panther. Arthur Pendleton was screaming into his phone, threatening lawsuits against blogs that were protected by journalistic anonymity. Dr. Hastings was cowering in the corner, clutching his medical bag as if it were a shield. "We need a statement, sir," Arthur shouted over the ringing phones. "We need you in front of cameras, looking healthy, denying everything. We tell the press it was a severe allergic reaction to shellfish. A fluke. Nothing chronic." "There is video of me turning the color of a bruised plum," Cole roared. "No one is going to believe it was a bad scallop." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the executive suite swung open. David, the massive security guard, stood in the doorway, looking remarkably uncomfortable. "Sir, I am so sorry." She bypassed the lobby security completely. She knew the catering delivery routes from her restaurant job. Celine Bennett walked into the room. She was wearing a faded denim jacket and jeans, looking incredibly small inside the cavernous, mahogany-paneled office. Yet her posture was ramrod straight. She held a thick manila envelope in her hands. Arthur Pendleton instantly moved to intercept her. "You are trespassing on private property. I will have you arrested for extortion and—" "Let her speak," Cole commanded, raising a hand. The sheer authority in his voice froze the lawyer in his tracks. Cole looked at the young woman who had bruised his jaw and saved his life. "You rejected $25,000, Miss Bennett. You must be very foolish, or very confident." "I'm desperate," Celine corrected him, stepping further into the room. She ignored the lawyer and locked eyes directly with the billionaire. "And you're being poisoned." The room went dead silent. Dr. Hastings went visibly pale. "This is absurd. Get this lunatic out of here." Celine slammed the manila envelope onto the glass table. "I recognized your symptoms perfectly the other night, Mr. Cole. My younger brother, Leo, has a severe congenital airway defect. We spent 2 years in and out of emergency rooms with him, suffering the exact same violent laryngospasms." She turned and pointed a steady finger directly at Dr. Hastings. "When your doctor dropped his bag the other night, I saw the labels on the vials. He's been pumping you full of high-dose ACEs inhibitors to manage your blood pressure, alongside heavy, daily benzodiazepines to keep you calm. But he never checked the contraindications." Cole frowned, his brow furrowing deeply. "Contraindications? My brother was put on a similar cocktail by a lazy resident doctor," Celine explained, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "In a tiny percentage of patients with specific neurological markers, that exact combination of drugs causes severe, spontaneous, paradoxical vocal cord dysfunction. It triggers the very spasms you are trying to prevent. Your doctor isn't treating your illness, Mr. Cole. His daily prescriptions are causing it. He is keeping you sick, terrified, and dependent on him, just to justify his $300,000 retainer." "Lies!" Hastings shrieked, his voice cracking perfectly in the middle of the word. He looked wildly between the lawyer and the CIO. "She's a waitress, a college dropout. Are you going to listen to her over a board-certified physician?" Cole didn't look at Hastings. He kept his eyes fixed entirely on Celine. "How long did it take for your brother's spasms to stop once he was taken off the medication?" 3 days, Celine said firmly. "He hasn't had an unprovoked attack in over a year. He needs a structural surgery now to fix the residual tissue damage, but the terrifying, out-of-nowhere suffocations—" They stopped immediately once the drugs were flushed from his system. Cole stood perfectly still. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating in its own right. He mentally traced back the timeline. His first episode happened 2 years ago, right after a minor car accident. That was exactly when Dr. Hastings had taken over his private care, prescribing the new blood pressure medication to deal with his executive stress. The billionaire slowly turned his head to look at his concierge doctor. Hastings was sweating profusely, taking small, involuntary steps backward toward the door. The absolute guilt was written across his face in bright neon letters. "David," Cole said quietly. The massive security guard stepped forward. "Yes, sir." "Escort Dr. Hastings out of my building. Ensure he leaves his medical bag, his access badges, and his company phone. If he attempts to contact me, or if he leaves the state before my legal team is finished auditing his medical records, break his legs." "Understood, sir," David said, grabbing the terrified doctor by the elbow and hauling him out of the suite. Cole turned to his lawyer, Arthur, who looked as though he had just swallowed a lemon. "Arthur, draft a new contract. Today. I am hiring Miss Bennett as a specialized medical consultant for Cole Dynamics. Her first year's salary will be exactly $1 million, paid in full in advance by wire transfer this afternoon. Oh, and contact Chicago Memorial Hospital. Have them book their finest surgical suite for her brother, fully funded by my personal foundation. Arthur opened his mouth to protest, saw the lethal look in Cole's eyes, and wisely snapped his mouth shut. Right away, sir. Cole walked around the glass table until he was standing just inches from Celine. Up close, she could see the deep lines of exhaustion around his eyes, but the color in his face was healthy. The ever-present grey pallor was gone. He had stopped taking the medication yesterday out of sheer stubbornness. You saved my life twice, Celine Bennett, Cole said, his voice softer than the public had ever heard it. Once with your hands, once with your mind. I owe you a debt that money can hardly cover. Celine felt the tears finally break through her carefully constructed defenses, the crushing, suffocating weight of poverty, the terror of losing Leo. It all vanished in a single, breathless moment. She let out a shaky, triumphant breath. $1 million covers it perfectly, Mr. Cole. The following week, Cole Dynamics held a massive press conference. Mr. Cole stood confidently at the podium, flanked not by corporate lawyers, but by Celine Bennett. He publicly explained the misdiagnosis, demonstrated his robust health, and announced the massive donation to Chicago Memorial Hospital's pediatric airway ward. The stock market rallied instantly, surging past its previous highs. Gregory Wyatt signed the merger documents the very next day. In the end, the billionaire learned that true power wasn't about controlling the world. It was about knowing when to admit you were wrong and honoring the word you gave to those brave enough to hold you accountable. And Celine? She finally traded her black and white apron for a pair of pristine, blue surgical scrubs, walking proudly through the doors of the university to finish what she started. Did this story of a humble waitress outsmarting the elite inspire you? Sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear capes, they wear aprons. If you loved this incredible true-life tale of justice, courage, and $1 million promise kept, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more amazing, dramatic stories that prove miracles really do happen every single day.